So then we move to, well, who's experiencing this? And this is impossible to talk about, but we can point to it, but I can't directly tell you who is experiencing this. The best way, I think, is maybe everything or nothing. No thing or everything is experiencing this. And that's so radical, but insanely beautiful. And the more and more it seems, although it's not a time-based thing, but it seems to be a time-based thing, the more and more this is heard, and or the less and less the identity goes into the human, then everything wakes up again. Rather than it being a limited object that's watching, everything is experiencing. That's not something you can imagine, because how could you imagine everything? Because you'd have already limited it. Talisi is quite a good way to point it out in. I like using Talisi as a description for this. So Talisi doesn't have the ability to think that she's a body. She can't think like that. She can't imagine herself. She doesn't recognize herself in the mirror. This morning I caught her looking in the mirror and she just kind of looked at it, and I could see there was a little bit of a bark starting. And then she sort of watched the movement and then just walked away and was like, nah, it's nothing. I was like, is there going to be some form of recognition here? No. So she can't, there's no sense that she's looking from a body and that she is that body. There's no sense that she's her actions. So she doesn't think that she's a friendly dog or a puppy or a 3 years old or from Thailand or had traumatic experiences. Although the body might be acting out these things and she might be friendly or traumatized or whatever it is. So, but she doesn't think she's that. She has no sense that is who she is. She can't separate that out from the sunlight, from the wind, from the food she's eating. Even though the body will act independently and eat food, she has no sense, I'm eating food. There is just the sensation of it. She doesn't even know the word sensation. It's such an amazing experience for a dog. There is just intimacy with everything that's happening with no position of somebody experiencing it. Now, why is this even relevant? Like, why even talk about it? And the reason that it's so relevant is the dog doesn't suffer. The dog doesn't take life personally. She doesn't get caught up in the idea that she's going to die, that she's got 10 years of life and that she's got to have the best life possible. She doesn't have the ability to identify herself as anything. So life just is simply happening for nobody in free fall. She doesn't have the expectation of things. There just isness. And energetically, the experience is, and this is known, but the person keeps looking in its limitations, is that everything is just appearing and disappearing. Even if she's growling at the door for like 2 hours or barking at the door because I've gone out and left her, even though she's repeating a pattern, the body's repeating a pattern, it's not happening to her. It's just happening. It's just reaction happening. So even though she's traumatized because she keeps looking at a plank of wood and she's been beaten by a plank of wood, so she keeps getting stuck in fear, or she's on an airplane and scared of the airplane for 12 hours, even though there's repetition happening, she's not taking it personally. There's nobody that's experiencing it. It's happening in boundlessness. And when I'm talking to you, it's really not an intellectual talking, because the intellect comes and goes. So even if you understood this intellectually, that's not what I'm talking about. I know that sounds hopeless. You maybe have followed me for like 10 minutes and like, but it's a reminding of something that's so primal. It's so intimate. This is known so strongly, but not by someone, that you were never the character moving in time. The character that's moving in time was an experience. And that isn't who you are. You are timelessness, in which time seems to appear, or boundlessness. And there might be a sense of knowing this, but it's not something that you can know or see. It's a resonance that's so deep. And even though this isn't a time-bound thing, this has been known throughout the body's life. And it keeps looking for this boundlessness in limitations. Keeps looking for it, because before the identification happened, there was everything, total freedom, and then the person started to identify, and suddenly they were separate from all things, and it felt an inadequacy, and then started to try to find the completion to that incompletion in objects and in things, in the mother's love, the father's love, the education, the success, the money. And these things are nice, and I'm not saying don't have them. That's not what we're saying. It's not about not having pleasure. It's just you won't find that completion that you're looking for in them. They're pleasure that comes and goes, and pleasure is really lovely. I'm not saying don't experience pleasure and go and live in a cave and no heating and never moving. That's not the idea of this. The idea of this is it, not an experience like that. And pleasure's part of it, but also pain's part of it as well. It's equal. It seems fair that it will be equal, more than likely, pleasure and pain. When you believe that your boundlessness, that everything will be found in pleasure, then pain becomes unbearable, because you've failed. Every time you get pain, you've failed to find your boundlessness. So not only is it pain, it's also failure. Inadequacy, it adds to that. And then when you get the pleasure, though, it adds an extra high, because you got it. But then quite quickly you'll lose it, because everything goes. Everything goes. The base sense of the person is lack. And often people don't stay in this subject for very long, or seeming people, because that lack becomes really obvious. And then they run off to try and cover it again. Maybe spiritual practices or some form of comfort. The base sense of the person is, I've been kicked out of boundlessness. I've been separated off. I've been abandoned by God.
Betrayed.
Yeah. It's just like the story of Adam and Eve, of eating the apple of knowledge and being kicked out of Eden. And you notice when you're in an argument with people, when you're arguing with identified people, each person, both of the people that are arguing never feel like they're wrong. I don't know if you've noticed. So whoever you're arguing with, they never feel like they're wrong. They always think that you're wrong, and then they think that they're wrong. And they might begin to feel guilt. You might convince them that they are wrong, and then they take it and they're like, oh yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. But it's to do with that it's that sense of you never asked to be kicked out of Eden. You never asked to be separate. You never asked for this bundle of things to happen, and people kind of feel a little bit victim to it. Like victim, not kind of, really feel victim to life. And then when somebody starts saying it's your fault, no, it's your fault, and then the straight thing comes up, it's your fault. But it always interests me. I used to work with kids with emotional behavioural disorders, and a lot of them went in and out of prisons, and sometimes I even worked in prisons or school prisons kind of thing. And it always amazed me that deep down none of them really felt wrong. Even though they had tremendous guilt in some way, it's like you could see when they did something and someone would say, why did you do that or something, you could see that there was a sense of, because I did. Which is the most truest answer, and then we convince them of why they're wrong and how they're bad. Everybody feels victim. The highest, what we would consider the worst abuser, which is most probably Hitler at the moment. I'm sure there's many more. Still Hitler. And out of everything that I've said, the intimacy of what is actually what's being talked about, even though I've seemingly given so many concepts. It really is about this, what's happening. There's no way out of it. If there's a discomfort, there's no way out of it. It is the discomfort. It is the longing. You'll never get there through running through time.